Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 35 of the Pet Behaviour Chat. So we've had a little bit of a topic of kind of fear, anxiety, and stress over the last few weeks, and I want to introduce a topic that does kind of follow those same lines. But it's something that's probably a little bit more specific. It's a kitty cat episode, so definitely one for all you cat lovers out there. And it's something that's pretty close to my heart just because I see a lot of issues and behavior problems that stem from this. And we're going to be talking about cat sociability, so cat-cat sociability, how cats get on with other cats, if they do, if they don't, why we see so many challenges with cat-cat social relationships. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we can do to facilitate good cat-cat introductions, whether that's introducing a new cat to perhaps an existing cat in the household, or whether we've perhaps had some aggressive events and we want to reintroduce the cats. So yeah, there's going to be quite a lot packed in here, but it's a big topic, so no doubt there will be future episodes on this as well. So let me start off by saying that I'm really fortunate as a veterinary behavior practitioner that I see a lot of feline cases. So a lot of my colleagues see mainly dogs. They don't really get to see that many cats. And I absolutely love cat behavior. So I feel really privileged to see a lot of cat behavior cases here in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE in general. However, the caseload that I see here amongst cats is probably quite different to the global sort of feline behavior caseload. So I'd say globally, the most common feline behavior problem case that's seen is probably elimination outside of the litter box. So that's cats maybe urinating and or defecating outside the litter box. And here in the UAE, especially, the number one feline behavior case that I see are inter-cat aggression cases. I see so many of them, and they can be really challenging to manage, and it can be really challenging to find a good resolution for these cases. And I want to talk a little bit about why that is. And that brings us back to cat-cat sociability. And the fact that cats amongst our domestic species, so those are the types of animals that we commonly live with, cats are probably, they're not the only one, but they're one of a very few that are non-socially obligate, or we can also say that they are socially flexible, perhaps. So what does that mean? So if you think about dogs, if you think about horses, if you think about sheep, if you think about cows, all those species are heavily reliant on social relationships with other members of that species. So dog to dog, cow to cow, sheep to sheep, horse to horse, and so on. They're heavily reliable on those social relationships for safety and survival, essentially. And that's survival of the individual, but that's also survival in terms of survival as a species to pass on their genetic material. So horses and sheep are probably the most extreme example of this, and you'll often find them in groups. In horses, we call that bands or herds. In sheep, we call that flocks. You'll find them in larger groups together. And that social cohesion and living in those social groups have real advantages for protection against predators and for survival. And if you think about one of the other really common species that we live with, dogs, you know that they have really complex social relationships. Their social communication amongst each other is really sophisticated and quite complex. And, again, they depend on these social relationships for survival and for, making sure that they stay safe. Cats, on the other hand, are quite different. Cats are, like I said, we call them non-socially obligate, so their survival does not depend on these social relationships. We also call them socially flexible, which means they can live solitary, they can live in groups, they can live in smaller groups, they can live in larger groups. Whether they always like that group living or not is another question, but it might be beneficial to them because there's a common food source or there's a common shelter area. So they can live socially flexibly. However, they do originate from a solitary ancestor, and that's the African wildcat. And they do have that propensity to live a solitary lifestyle. So cats are what we call solitary hunters. So they don't hunt in groups, for example, like lions would. They hunt on their own, they're solitary, and they also eat on their own. So they're not social feeders. They don't, like us, like sitting around the table eating with other cats. They're very, very solitary in those behaviors. And that a little bit points towards why sometimes we can see real difficulties when we have either two or more cats living together in the same household. So what determines whether cats are socially flexible or whether they're more solitary? What determines what kind of cat personality, if you like, you're going to get in terms of sociability? Well, that often depends largely on their genetics. So inherently, we know that their ancestry is from a solitary ancestor. So there is going to be some genetic bias towards that solitary lifestyle, but also epigenetics. So their experiences both in the womb and in early life can be really, really predictive here. And then also their learning experiences in the socialization period. So in cats, the socialization period ranges from about 2 weeks of age to about 7/9 weeks of age. And it's what they learn in that time about social relationships with other cats that's going to be really predictive for how they feel about living with cats in the future. So it's quite complex. There's a lot that goes into it. So it's genetics, as in what do they inherit? It's epigenetics in terms of how is their genetic code influenced by the environment, both in utero, so whilst they're still in their mother's wombs. And then we also have this socialization period learning, plus all the learning that goes after that, of course, as well. So what kind of relationships could two or more cats have with each other? Well, number one, they could be what we call socially affiliative with each other. And that means they're really friends. They're truly and really friends. And we often see this in cats that groom each other. So we call that allogrooming. So they'll groom each other, or they'll perhaps rest together with at least 25% of their bodies touching each other. So that's that kind of pillowing behavior. So cats that display those behaviors are generally what we call socially affiliative. They're really and truly friends. Now that can change over time. I have seen relationships that have been very, very affiliative turn into a hostile relationship. So that can happen because of events that happen throughout the cat's lives. But yeah, that's the first sort of affiliation that you can find, those cats that are truly affiliative. And they tend to be cats that are either siblings or that are perhaps related. You know, it could be mother and offspring relationships, or it could be two cats that are not related but that have grown up with each other from a very young age. So those are generally the type of relationships, or the types of cat relationships that tend to be affiliative. That's not always, you know, we also know cats that have been introduced to each other later on in life that develop these affiliative relationships. But as a rule of thumb, siblings or related cats tend to be more affiliative. So there's a bit of a clue in that, and that is if you do want to have more than one cat, then, you know, getting a pair of kitten siblings is probably a really good idea, rather than trying to introduce two unfamiliar cats to each other later on. So that's the first type of relationship, that truly affiliative relationship. The next type of relationship is that kind of mutually tolerable. So those would be two cats that kind of coexist in the same space, that don't really have any social affiliation with each other, but that also don't fight, that aren't hostile, that just kind of coexist. So that would just be kind of a, you know, they kind of accept each other. They, you know, they're okay with each other's presence, but there's no truly affiliative relationship there. And those will be cats that maybe rest in different rooms to each other. That, you know, that those are cats that in general don't really seek each other's company. They'll kind of be going about life doing their own thing pretty much. So that's the second type of relationship. The third type of relationship are cats that show kind of passive aggressive behaviors towards each other, that maybe don't actively engage in fights, but that maybe stare at each other, or one cat stares at the other cat. They maybe block access to resources. So you might find one cat blocking the other's cat's access to the litter box, to food, to water, to preferred resting places. You might see that kind of tail flicking, that frustration behavior between the two cats, but there are no offensive physical fights. So that's the third type of relationship, where we've got some underlying passive aggressive behavior going on there. We've got this kind of passive aggressive relationship, but we've got no active physical fights. And then the fourth type of relationship, and this is often then where I get called in, is where we do have active, offensive, aggressive behaviors. So that could be cats that really get involved in these balls of cats, with fur flying, maybe with injury of one cat from the other. You'll often hear a lot of vocalization, a lot of screaming, yowling, hissing. And you can have, one cat that is obviously the aggressor and another cat that's obviously the victim cat. Or you can have two cats that are relatively equal in who does the aggression and who is the aggressor and who is the victim cat. And these relationships, I think, are very, very difficult for everybody to live with. Both the cats that are involved as well as the caregivers. They can be really distressing to watch, and they can go as far as soon as the cats just catch a glimpse of each other, or as soon as the cats just perhaps even smell each other, we get this high arousal, emotions are high, and we get immediately these very offensive, aggressive behaviors. And if caregivers are experiencing this, then really the only thing to do to begin with is to separate the cats, is to have a permanent separation with the two cats separated into different areas of the house or into separate rooms. And we really want to avoid them even catching a glimpse of each other or even smelling each other, because every time that we have an interaction between those cats, it's just going to make the situation worse. So I often hear people ask me, should we just let them fight it out? And I would say absolutely no. So in my experience, that doesn't end well usually. And it usually actually just reinforces how the cats feel about each other, that they don't like each other. And it usually just very much makes the situation worse. So when we get to that point, we definitely get to a point of permanent separation. Okay, so those are the types of relationships that we can be dealing with. And I guess the one thing that I would say here is, once we have a fractured relationship like this, it can be really difficult for the cats to reconcile with each other, or to make up, if you like. And again, that goes back to that socially non-obligate being that is a cat, is that they don't have natural reconciliatory behaviors that they do to repair fractured relationships and to make up with each other. And those behaviors do exist in these other species that are very socially obligate. So horses, if they have had a bit of a tense interaction with each other, they will reconcile. Often they'll do that by grooming each other's withers. And it's very important to them to reestablish good social relationships and to reestablish that group cohesion, because, as we said, it's important for their survival. So they'll be much more motivated to try and keep the peace and make up and restore these relationships. And cats simply don't have that. I don't think I've ever seen a case where the cats have just kind of made up again and they've gone on their way. Perhaps in very, very mild cases, or perhaps in cases where we have gone in and optimized the environment, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, then that allows the cats to kind of, for emotional arousal to reduce, and for the cats to kind of accept the other in their living space. But when we have these sort of offensive, aggressive behaviors, it's really, really unusual and rare. And I don't think I've ever seen it, that cats just naturally then make up again and everything's fine again. And that's a big challenge when it comes to treating some of these cases, because you can't put that behavior into the cats. You can't just tell them to make up. They just don't have the pre-programmed behaviors. They don't have that kind of genetic predisposition to do that. So that makes things quite difficult. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about resources, because I think this is another thing that's really, really important in the bigger context of this. So, number one, what do we mean by resources for cats? Well, resources are things like food stations, water stations, litter boxes, resting places, access to people, to the human caregivers, scratching areas, toys, opportunity for predatory behavior. All those things are resources. And resources are really, really important to cats. And when we have a number of cats in the home and we don't have enough resources for all of them, then oftentimes that can contribute to these tense relationships, because everybody's trying to protect their resource against the others. So one thing that we can do is make sure that we've got an absolute abundance of resources. Now, we usually talk about number of cats in the household plus one. So let's say you've got 3 cats in the home, you should have 4 of all of these resources at least. Sometimes we need more. And the really important thing is that they're physically separated from each other. So we don't want to have 4 litter boxes lined up all next to each other, because that doesn't solve the problem of access to the litter boxes. We want to have the litter boxes in different areas in the house. If it's a multi-story house, we want them on all different floors so that cats can easily access all of these resources without having to, perhaps cross the path of another cat, or without having to come up against somebody who's maybe defending that resource in that moment. So we talk about multiple and separated resources. And that is pretty much always a part of my treatment plan. So we always talk about environmental optimization of those resources, seeing how we can get more of them, how we can separate them better, how we can perhaps put, maybe some at a height. So we might put some food bowls up high so that some cats, that prefer those types of areas can jump up and eat. So we try and really sort of cater to the individual preferences of the cats, and to really optimize those resources. So that's really, really, really important. Okay, let's talk a little bit about actually what the topic of this webinar is, and that's introductions. So number one is you've got a single cat, you've got a cat and that cat is really happy, very content, and you think about getting a second cat. And you might be motivated to get a second cat because you think your first cat needs a friend, or perhaps because you're out and about a lot of the day and you're worried that your original cat might be lonely. Let me tell you that is probably not the case. Again, cats are by nature solitary, and a single cat is probably really, really happy. Again, there can be exceptions, and those are usually sort of individual cases, but it's extremely rare that I would ever recommend for somebody to get a second cat as a friend for their original cat. A single cat is probably pretty happy as long as they have everything that they need, as long as they have all their resources, as long as their environmental needs are met, as long as they're being stimulated, as long as they've got the ability to be a cat, to behave like a cat. They've got plenty of opportunity for play, for predation. Their environment is safe. The interactions with their humans are safe. I think as long as all of that is given, single cats in a household are probably really, really happy. And the problems usually arise when we start to introduce new and unfamiliar cats into an existing household. And I've seen multi-cat homes where we've had 6, 7, 8 cats introduced over a period of time. And sometimes the original cat may tolerate 1 cat or maybe 2 cats coming into the home. But as the numbers increase, that gets more and more difficult. And oftentimes that has to do with the resources that I just spoke about, but also that very, very important resource of space and territory. The more cats that we add into the mix, the more we're challenging the space and the territory of all of these cats. And don't get me wrong, sometimes you can be super lucky and you can have a number of cats living together that are really happy and that coexist, really happily. And this is usually in sort of large homes, maybe with large gardens where the cats have access to the outdoors and they can naturally disperse, and there are plenty of resources available. And the temperaments of the cats are so that, they're accepting of other cats in that space. And that can be absolutely fine. However, the more cats that you add to the mix, the more pressure you're going to be putting on space, resources, territory, and the more you're going to be challenging the ability to cope with that sort of social density. So I think that would be my first point, is really think carefully about adding another cat to the home. If you're doing it for reasons that you feel your cat wants to have a playmate or a friend, then that's probably not the right motivation. I think as long as you're providing everything in that cat's environment, they're very, very happy as a solitary cat. Okay, so let's say we are adding a second cat to the home. How should we actually go about it? Well, the answer here and the key to everything here is to be slow and gradual, and to not immediately confront the two cats with each other. I would not let them see each other initially. I would definitely do a separated introduction. So that means having one cat, usually the newcomer, separated away into a room or an area, and see how the original cat reacts and responds. And then very, very gradually, you can start to do what we call scent swapping. So cats rely heavily on scent. So they produce pheromones in various glands throughout their body. And part of the job of those pheromones is for recognition and familiarity. So we want to give the cats an opportunity to start getting used to each other's smells and scents. So you can do that by, swapping items in the rooms. So if you have cat beds, for example, or a blanket that perhaps the cats like to lie on, you can just swap them into other rooms. You can also perhaps swap toys that they've maybe played with. So all those things are good in the beginning. And what you absolutely want to do is you want to look for both cats' reactions when they're introduced to this item that carries the other cat's smell. If you have any kind of behavioral or physiological reaction, such as the cat perhaps hissing at the blanket or the item, or we've got ears turning back, or we've got pupils dilating, or, we've got kind of fur standing up on end, which is what we call piloerection. If you've got any of these types of behaviors, or even just the cat's backing away from that item and trying to escape from it, then that's probably a sign that you're going to need quite a long and slow introduction period. And that would be a little bit of a red flag for me in terms of, the cats actually accepting each other and being comfortable with each other. So very, very slow, very, very gradual scent swapping at first. And if you get to a point where the cats are tolerating the smell of each other and we're not having any kind of behavioral reactions to those items, then you can very, very carefully attempt a visual introduction. And I would always say that should be through some kind of barrier initially. So we would want to put up some kind of a mesh structure or some kind of an opaque kind of a gate between the two areas, usually maybe a baby gate with some mesh, or kind of a higher baby gate that kind of reaches almost the entirety of the door space. And we just want to see how the cats respond to the sight of each other. It's very, very helpful if you can have two people involved in this initially, because you probably want to be distracting or interacting with each of the cats as we make these teeny tiny visual introductions. And again, food might not be the best option here. So the whole idea of feeding the cats next to each other is probably not a great idea in cats, because we know that they are solitary feeders. We know that they're not social feeders. And you might be causing a situation of conflicted behaviors, whereby the cat wants to get to the food, but at the same time, they don't want to get close to the other cat. And they start to get these very sort of conflicted emotions, which we know are not great and that can coincide with high arousal. So distance is going to be your friend here. So you want to have the cats at a distance, and you probably want to be playing with them. You want to be distracting them, maybe with a feather toy or a wand toy, and see what happens. And if they catch a glimpse of each other, then you probably want to carry on playing, and you want to carry on distracting, and you want to keep these moments very, very short. So 30 seconds, and then working up gradually from there. So the two things that are going to be your friends in this instance are distance and short periods of time initially. Toys and play are going to be really important, and food might not be that helpful. You could perhaps use high value treats that you can give as you're playing, just to, again, positively reinforce the presence of the other cat. But allowing them to consume their meals or eat next to each other is not a good idea. And I've often seen things go wrong because of that. So that's not something that I would recommend at all. And then I think if you can start to sort of slowly build on that, then at some point we can have supervised sort of introductions into the same space, really short periods. I am a little bit dubious about using things like harnesses or crates, because it always harnesses one of the two cats in terms of their ability to escape or to move away from. So if you have a physical barrier or a physical restriction on one of the two cats, it really inhibits their ability to perform their natural behavior, which in that instance might be to want to get away or to put more distance between themselves and the other cat. So I find those types of interactions tricky. I would then rather still have some kind of a physical barrier in place and rather reduce the distance between the cats, always under supervision to see how the two cats respond to each other. So, and sometimes you want to engage the help of a professional here. I mean, we have a fantastic team who, often help with new introductions and just guiding people through that to make sure that it remains a really safe process. There are things that can help. Pheromones can help. Feliway in this instance can absolutely be helpful, especially the Feliway Friends, or multicat as it's known in the US. Is it going to immediately make your cats friends? No, absolutely not. But the nature of the pheromone, so Feliway Friends is a cat appeasing pheromone, may help to ease introductions to each other. You could consider using a supplement such as Zilkine or Angstane in this time of introduction. That could be really, really helpful. And sometimes we do actually then need to consider psychopharmaceutical medications to help facilitate introductions, especially if there has been quite a lot of hostility between the two cats. So those are things that can help, but you need to really be thinking about time. And, when I say time, we're talking 6 weeks minimum, probably, up to months if necessary. And you always need to be guided by the cats as to how slowly or quickly you are to proceed with this. And let them kind of guide you and lead the way. So one thing I just want to very quickly touch on, because it's something that I spoke about just a second ago, and that is the situation where we've got two cats that were previously really good friends, that had an affiliative relationship, two cats that maybe groomed each other or, lay on top of each other when they were resting. And these cats perhaps have now experienced a breakdown in their relationship. Oftentimes that is precipitated by some kind of an event in the environment. And the classic example here is one of the cats maybe going to the veterinary clinic because they're unwell, or because the cats have been groomed, and maybe they've been showered, which we absolutely don't recommend, or maybe they've had perfume applied to them, which we absolutely don't recommend. And that is because that very, very important piece, which is recognition through scent and through natural pheromones, has been altered. So the cat that comes home from the veterinary clinic all of a sudden essentially is a stranger to the cat that stayed at home because they smell different. So for those cats, it's not just about visual recognition, it's about recognition through smell and scent and those all important pheromones. And so when you do have a cat that's maybe coming home from the veterinary clinic, I would advise that you do a slow introduction, such as the one that I've just described. It maybe doesn't need to be quite as long, but we want to make sure that the cats get reintroduced to each other and that they remember, actually, I know this cat, and that they get reintroduced to their smells, that the cat that's been away can start to smell more like themselves again, and produce more pheromones, to kind of cover the unfamiliar smell of where they've been. So those types of situations can be really tricky. So I would absolutely recommend a slow introduction, even if one cat's been out of the home for a period of time. And then we can have other events. And I've seen some cases that have been really unusual, where we've had two cats that have actually been sibling cats that have lived in the same home for years, that have been the best of friends, that have groomed each other. And something has happened in the environment, such as in one case, for example, there was a vase that fell on the floor and broke and shattered in the presence of the two cats. And that scary event was enough to fracture the relationship between the two cats. And I've had cases where we've had sort of similar events or things happen that has, because the two cats were kind of both present when the event happened, it was kind of wrong place, wrong time, that has somehow fractured their relationship because they both got a fright, they both became fearful in this moment, and there was an association that was made with the presence of the other cat. So those situations can be really difficult for clients, for caregivers to deal with, because they're just confused as to why, their two cats or their cats that have previously gotten on with each other, why now all of a sudden they can't even be in the same room with each other. And this is sometimes where we need to intervene with some behavioral first aid to help kind of, reduce the fear, anxiety, stress that those cats have felt and are feeling as a result of that event, and to help guide caregivers through a reintroduction process to kind of help these cats reacquaint with each other and get back to being friends again. And this can be difficult and it can take a long time, although in my experience, the prognosis is better if we've had two cats that have previously had a good relationship, as opposed to perhaps two unfamiliar cats that have been put together that don't take a liking to each other, and that we really struggle to make an introduction to. One other thing I just wanted to quickly talk about is if you have an older cat and you introduce a kitten, be aware that the older cat might be suffering from physical health challenges. We might have pain, chronic pain, arthritis, other medical diseases, and obviously a younger cat coming into that mix, as well as everything that we've just talked about, the resources, the environment, the fact that cats are not socially obligate, as well as then, perhaps a high energy younger cat that might be kind of pouncing on or jumping on an older cat that's maybe sore. Those types of situations can be difficult as well. And they can be especially difficult for the older cat who all of a sudden doesn't understand why their world has been turned upside down. So yeah, just a thing to consider. Again, if you're thinking you've got an older cat and you want to introduce a kitten because you want to give the older cat a new lease of life, that's not going to work. Or I would strongly recommend against that. I have not often seen that work. And in fact, it can be really challenging for the older cat that's, trying to have a peaceful sort of older life. And then this kind of youngster comes in and turns their world upside down. So that can be challenging as well. Okay, so I think that is pretty much everything I have. Obviously, cases of intercat aggression where we really have, big hostile events, they can be very, very challenging. And honestly, I don't think that they can be solved without the help of a professional. And even if I do go in and consult on these cases, one of the first things I say is we can do everything, right, and we can make all the best inroads, and we might still not have a positive outcome here. And there are so many reasons for that. But I think genetics and epigenetics, early life experiences, the temperament of the cats, where on that sociability spectrum they sit, whether they tolerate the presence of the other cat, whether we have enough space in the environment to accommodate a number of cats. All those things are going to be massively, massively important when we kind of think about prognosis and outcomes. So, yeah, I see a lot of these cases, and I have a wealth of experience now in what works, what doesn't, which cases tend to have a more favorable prognosis, and which cases don't. But overall, yes, they're challenging situations to deal with and to live with. And slow and early introductions can be really, really, really important and helpful. Optimizing the environment with resources can be really, really, really helpful. However, the biggest thing, I think, is to consider whether you need to get a second cat. It can go okay, but it can also not go very well. And it can put a lot of stress on everybody involved if it doesn't go well. So those are the thoughts I'm going to leave you with. Please get in touch if you are in that kind of situation, if you need help, if you need advice. But I hope that's given you some pointers in terms of optimizing the environment and slow introductions, scent swapping, gradual visual introductions, and so on. And like I say, if you think that you're worried about doing it on your own, we have a number of people on my team that can help guide you through that. So, yeah. Hope that's helped, and hope that's been of value to you kitty cat lovers out there. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody next week for episode 36. Alrighty, bye for now.